Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into the world of regression testing, something that's so crucial for making sure your software, well, actually works.
It really is.
So whether you're trying to impress your boss with some dev knowledge, maybe for a meeting,
Uh-huh.
or you're just a curious mind wanting to know what goes on behind the scenes of those bug-free apps we all love, stick around. This deep dive is just the ticket. And honestly, get this. Did you know that something as simple as adding a wish list to an online store could totally mess up your checkout process?
It's true.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
wild, but we're going to get into how that happens and, more importantly, how to avoid it.
Yeah, those regressions, they can be a real pain. Little bugs creeping in when you least expect it. You make one little change over here and bam, something completely unrelated breaks over there. It's like the butterfly effect in code.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. What exactly is regression testing and why should we even care?
So, imagine this. You're leading a team building a mobile banking app. Okay, you're about to launch this awesome new feature, right? Biometric login, everyone's excited.
Yeah.
You've tested it, it works perfectly, but then reports start pouring in. Users can't see their balances after the update.
Uh-oh.
What happened? Well, that biometric login, it messed with the code for checking balances. A classic regression.
Oh, that's scary, especially for something like banking.
Exactly. And that's what regression testing is all about. It's like having a safety net, making sure those existing features still work perfectly after you tweak the code. We're talking about preventing those nightmare scenarios before they reach the users.
So basically, it's like constantly double-checking your work, like
Yeah.
making sure you didn't accidentally undo something important while you were fixing something else.
Exactly. And just like you wouldn't use a hammer for every single repair job,
Right.
there are different kinds of regression testing.
So it's not just a one-size-fits-all.
Not at all. If you're just changing a tiny bit of code, you might only need unit regression testing, like making sure you tightened a screw properly.
Makes sense.
But let's say you're adding a whole new payment system to your website. That's a big deal. You'll probably need to do some partial regression testing.
Otherwise,
You could end up with a broken checkout for certain types of payments. It all comes down to how big the changes are and what could potentially go wrong.
that makes total sense. Like you said, you don't want to use a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
Exactly. And that's where automation comes in. It's taken regression testing from this time-consuming chore to something super efficient.
Yeah, I can't imagine manually testing an entire app every time a developer changes a single line of code. That'd be insane.
Absolutely. And for web applications, there are tools like Selenium. It lets you write scripts that run these tests automatically every time your code updates. Imagine having a robot that tirelessly checks everything for you, making sure nothing's broken.
All right, so we've got these robot assistants, right? But how do we tell them what to focus on?
Well, that's where strategy comes in. You don't want to test everything blindly. You got to
Okay.
prioritize. Think about what's most likely to be affected by the changes you just made.
Got it.
So let's say you added a new search filter to your app. Your regression test should zero in on the search results page and the database queries, all that stuff that powers the search. You wouldn't need to retest the entire login process, for instance.
Right, you want your testing to be focused and efficient.
Exactly. And another crucial thing, keep your test suite updated. Your app is constantly evolving, right? Your tests need to keep up. New features need new tests. Old, outdated ones need to be removed. It's like spring cleaning, but for your tests.
Makes sense. Cluttered test suite, probably not going to be helpful.
Exactly. And that's where version control for your test cases comes in. Track your changes, revert back if needed. Manage everything efficiently just like you would with your actual application code.
Version control for test cases. That's actually a great point. Never thought of that, but it makes perfect sense.
And documentation, too. Super important. Document your test results, any failures, the steps you took to debug. It's like a detailed logbook of your entire testing adventure.
So it's not just about running the tests. It's about learning and keeping track of everything that happened along the way.
Exactly. It's like having a treasure map that can help you navigate the twists and turns of your app's development journey.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about the what, the why, the how of regression testing. But to really drive this home, let's hear a real-world example of how this plays out and why it's so crucial.
Okay, remember that e-commerce platform we talked about? The one adding the product review feature? Well, they tested that feature on its own, Everything worked perfectly.
Yeah.
What they didn't expect was that this new feature would clash with their search filters, even messed up the checkout process.
Oh, that's a nightmare, especially for an online business.
Exactly. But they were smart. They had a solid regression testing process in place. They were using Selenium for their automated tests. And thanks to Jenkins, those tests ran every time the code was updated.
It's like I said, robots on high alert.
Precisely. And because of that, they caught the issue early on, fixed it before it could do any real damage.
Save the day. I can't imagine the chaos if that bug had made it to the actual site.
Absolutely. And that's the power of regression testing. It's not just about finding bugs, it's about stopping those bugs from impacting your users.
So it's about protecting your users and your business.
Exactly. And that's why regression testing is such a good investment.
Okay, this has been really eye-opening. I'm starting to see why this is so vital. But how do we know if our testing is working?
That's where key performance indicators, KPIs, come in.
Okay, so we got to measure our testing effectiveness. What are some of those key things we should be looking at to make sure we're on the right track?
One of the big ones is the defect detection rate. Basically, it tells you what percentage of bugs your tests are actually finding.
So a high rate is a good sign.
Absolutely. It means your tests are doing their job, finding those regressions before they cause trouble. Then there's test coverage.
What's that?
That tells you how much of your code is actually being tested. You want to aim for high coverage, ideally over 80%, to be sure you're not missing anything.
Okay, so high test coverage, high defect detection rate, those are our goals.
Exactly. And there's also time to detection, or TTD, which is all about how quickly you're finding those regressions.
So the faster the better.
Of course. The quicker you find and fix a bug, the less damage it can do.
Right, speed is key.
And lastly, there's the bug recurrence rate. This tells you how often those bugs you thought you squashed, well, come back to haunt you.
Okay, so we're keeping track of how many bugs we find, how quickly we find them, how much of our code is tested, and whether those pesky bugs are trying to make a comeback. Sounds pretty thorough.
It is. These KPIs can really tell you how healthy your regression testing process is and where you might need to improve things. It's all about delivering high-quality software.
This has been incredibly insightful, but I'm not going to lie, I'm a little intimidated by how complex it all seems. What are some of the challenges teams run into with this, and how do they overcome them?
Well, regression testing can be tough, that's for sure.
So let's talk about those challenges. What are we up against here?
One of the biggest ones is resources. Doing thorough regression testing, especially for big, complex applications, takes a lot of time and effort.
That must be really hard for smaller teams.
It can be. And keeping your test suite up to date is another challenge. It's a constant game of catch-up as your app changes and grows.
Like trying to hit a moving target.
Exactly. And then there's false positives, those test failures that make you think there's a bug, but there isn't.
Oh, that must be frustrating. Like a fire alarm going off when there's no fire.
Exactly. They can send your team on wild goose chases.
So how do we deal with all this? Any strategies or tips?
Absolutely. To handle the resource issue, automation is your best friend.
Let the robots do the work.
Exactly. For test suite maintenance, there's no magic solution, but version control and good documentation can be lifesavers.
So organization is key.
For sure. And with those false positives, well, you need sharp debugging skills and a keen eye for detail. Sometimes you just need to tweak your test environment to better reflect the real world.
Okay, so it's a combination of having the right tools, the right processes, and the right people to really conquer these challenges.
You got it. And remember, regression testing is an ongoing journey. You're always learning, you're always adapting as your app evolves.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to touch on regression testing within Agile and CI/CD environments.
Yeah, it's super important there. Those environments are all about frequent updates and deployments.
So how does regression testing fit into that fast-paced world?
Imagine this. Every time a developer on your team adds new code, a series of tests, including regression tests, automatically run.
Like a built-in quality check.
Exactly. Tools like Jenkins or GitLab CI/CD can handle all of this, making it seamless.
So it's like a supercharged safety net, catching bugs before they even have a chance to cause trouble.
That's a great way to put it. Finding and fixing issues early and often means smoother, more stable releases.
Which ultimately leads to happier users.
Exactly.
Now, this is all very insightful, but I'm curious, what does the future hold for all of this? What trends should we be paying attention to?
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. We're starting to see AI and machine learning being used for regression testing in some pretty cool ways.
Oh, AI, of course. Got to be AI. So what's that look like?
Well, picture this. An AI learns from past bugs in your login system, right? It then automatically creates new test cases to find similar weaknesses in a new password reset feature you're building. That's AI-powered test generation, basically helping you find regressions before they even happen.
So it's like having an AI teammate that's learning and getting better right alongside your app.
Exactly. And then there's predictive regression testing, where the AI looks at your code and tries to predict how likely it is to have regressions. This helps teams focus their testing efforts on the areas that need the most attention.
Wow, so AI is making this whole process more proactive, more efficient, and maybe even a little psychic.
You got it. AI is changing the game, making regression testing even more valuable in this fast-paced world of software development.
This has been a fantastic deep dive so far. We've talked about the what, the why, the how, even peeked into the future of regression testing. But for now, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk more about the challenges, explore some of those trends we just touched on in more detail. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. It's great to be continuing this deep dive with you.
It's amazing to see how AI is transforming practically everything these days, software testing included. But before we get too lost in the future, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the challenges of regression testing. We talked about resources, keeping those test suites updated, and those annoying false positives. Are there any other challenges our listeners should know about?
Yeah, definitely. One that often trips teams up is getting the test environment right. Ideally, you want your tests running in an environment that's as close to your live production environment as possible.
Right, because you want to make sure your tests are finding issues that will actually affect real users.
Exactly. But setting up and maintaining that kind of environment, it can be a real headache and expensive too.
It's like you can practice your golf swing at the driving range, but it's not the same as playing on a real course.
Perfect analogy. Another tricky one is dealing with legacy code. You know, those older applications that often have, shall we say, interesting structures and very little documentation.
Ah, legacy code, the bane of many developers' existence.
It can be a nightmare trying to create effective regression tests for that kind of code, like renovating a house built 100 years ago with no blueprints.
So how do we tackle these challenges?
Well, for test environments, virtualization and cloud-based solutions can be game changers. They let you spin up test environments quickly and without breaking the bank.
So we're talking about flexibility and efficiency in our testing environments.
Exactly. Now, legacy code, that's a tougher nut to crack. It often involves careful analysis, some refactoring, basically cleaning up and reorganizing the code, and a lot of patience.
Not always the most glamorous work, but essential nonetheless.
Absolutely. Speaking of challenges, managing expectations can be a big one too. Stakeholders, they don't always get the importance of regression testing or how long it takes to do it right.
They probably just see it as an added expense.
Right. And that's where communication is so important. You got to educate them about the value of preventing bugs early on, before they cause real problems in production.
It's like explaining the importance of regular car maintenance. Might seem like an extra cost now, but it can save you a ton of money and headaches down the road.
Exactly. Thinking long-term, prioritizing quality.
Now let's shift gears a bit. What about the human side of all this? What skills does someone need to really excel at regression testing?
Well, first off, you need a sharp, analytical mind. You got to be able to think critically about the code, see how changes in one area could affect others.
So it's not just blindly following a checklist.
Definitely not. You got to think like a detective, anticipating where those bugs might be hiding. Then, attention to detail is crucial. Regression testing is all about finding those subtle changes, those inconsistencies that others might miss.
Like a code proofreader, catching those tiny typos that can cause big problems.
Exactly. And of course, communication skills are key. You got to be able to clearly explain your findings to developers, project managers, everyone involved.
Bridging the gap between the tech folks and the non-tech folks.
Precisely. And I'd say a good dose of curiosity and a love of learning are essential too.
Because technology is always changing.
Always. A good regression tester is always learning new tools, new techniques, staying ahead of the curve.
It's like being a lifelong student of software.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so exciting.
Our listeners now have a good understanding of regression testing, the importance of it, even the qualities that make a good tester. But before we wrap up, I want to revisit those trends we touched on earlier.
Ah, yes, the future of regression testing. So many possibilities.
Let's dive back in. We talked about AI-powered test generation, predictive regression testing. Anything else on the horizon that you're excited about?
One trend that I'm really keeping my eye on is self-healing systems.
Huh.
Imagine a system that not only finds regressions, but fixes them automatically.
Whoa, hold on. That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. How would that even work?
It's still early days, but the idea is to use AI and machine learning to analyze the code, pinpoint those regressions, then automatically generate and apply the fix.
So basically a robot mechanic for your code.
You got it. This could save developers a ton of time, freeing them up for more creative work.
That would be a total game changer.
It would. Another trend is the shift towards shift-left testing. The idea here is to start testing earlier in the development process, ideally even during the design phase.
So finding those bugs before they even have a chance to take root.
Precisely. It's much easier and cheaper to fix a problem early on, like catching a typo while you're writing, rather than after you've printed 1,000 copies.
Makes sense. Prevention is always better than cure.
Absolutely. And shift-left testing really fits in well with the whole agile and CI/CD approach, where continuous feedback and integration are key.
So the future of regression testing is all about being proactive, efficient, and baked into the entire development process.
That's a great way to put it. And with AI and machine learning getting more sophisticated, we can expect even more innovation in this area.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive. We've gone from the basics to the cutting edge, even peeked into the future.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you and our listener.
To our listener, thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and feel inspired to explore this evolving field further.
Absolutely. Whether you're a seasoned developer, a curious newbie, or somewhere in between, understanding regression testing is so important in our increasingly software-driven world.
And now, as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. So we've talked a lot about the technical side, the tools, techniques, challenges, but I want to zoom out a little, look at the bigger picture here. With AI taking on a bigger role in regression testing, what happens to us humans? What does this mean for human testers?
Yeah, it's a question we got to ask ourselves. As AI gets better at handling those more routine tasks, what does that mean for the human element?
Are we headed towards a world where robots are running all the tests, no humans needed? I've seen those movies. Not a big fan of that ending.
I wouldn't go that far just yet. I think it's less about robots replacing us and more about robots working with us. A collaboration.
Okay, so maybe not a full-blown robot takeover.
Exactly. Think of it this way. AI can take care of those repetitive tasks, running those hundreds or even thousands of tests. And that frees us humans to focus on the more complex stuff, the things that require creativity and critical thinking.
Right, like understanding how real users interact with the software, designing those really unique tests that AI might not even think of.
Precisely. And as AI keeps getting smarter, it's probably going to create new roles, new opportunities in the testing world. Maybe we'll have AI test architects or machine learning test specialists, jobs that combine deep knowledge of software testing with expertise in AI.
So instead of being afraid of AI taking our jobs, maybe we should be thinking about how it can help us learn new skills, open up new career paths.
Absolutely. It's all about adapting, evolving along with the technology, finding ways to use AI to our advantage while still valuing those unique skills that only humans have.
Speaking of AI, I can't help but think about the ethical side of things. Are there any concerns we should be thinking about as AI becomes more involved in testing?
Oh, absolutely. Like any powerful tool, there's always the potential for misuse, and AI is no exception.
For example, we wouldn't want AI creating tests that are biased against certain groups of users. That would be a huge problem.
Exactly. We have to be incredibly careful about the data used to train these AI models. It needs to be diverse, representative, unbiased. The last thing we want is for AI to just perpetuate existing biases or even create new ones.
So even in an AI-driven world, human oversight, human judgment, those are still crucial.
Absolutely. We need humans in the loop making those important decisions about what gets tested, how it gets tested, and ultimately how much risk is acceptable. AI can be an amazing tool, but we have to use it responsibly, ethically.
Wow, this deep dive has really opened my eyes. We've covered so much. The technical side, the exciting potential of AI, even those important ethical questions.
It's been a fascinating conversation. I hope our listener feels the same way, energized about the future of software testing.
To our listener, thank you so much for diving in with us. We hope you've learned a lot and maybe even feel inspired to explore this field further.
Whether you're a developer, a tester, or just someone who uses software every day, understanding this stuff is so important, especially as technology keeps advancing.
And as we wrap things up, we want to leave you with this. How do you see the future of software testing? What role do you want to play in shaping that future?
Stay curious, explore those new possibilities, and help build a future where software is not only innovative but also reliable and trustworthy.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.